Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us. We're just watching a few others just join now, but it's 12 o'clock it's 12:01, so we're on time, ready to go. Today's webinar we're talking about the governance of automation. Like all the webinars that Right Source do, we're really here about trying to share with you the experiences that we've had in business and our long careers working in these spaces, and really try not only share some information, but also try and give you a bit of the understanding of the why, so that you can, I suppose, understand how it might apply to your situation or your business or wherever you're working. So welcome to the webinar. As I said, it's about governance of automation. We're really looking at who is looking after the robots and a practical insight into how we manage that. Today, I've got Natasha Lamb, who is the head of finance automation at Blackbook AI, joining with us, and she will be sharing a fair bit of knowledge with us. Tash, you want to sort of give a bit of background of yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. Natasha Lamb from Blackbook. I specialise in finance automation. And a bit about Blackbook. We're about 5 years young, and we specialise in AI and automation. And I know that's fairly broad, but we really are end-to-end, providing digital solutions with emerging technology. So that's anywhere from starting your RPA journey, maybe just understanding your data a bit more, digitising your paperwork, or anywhere up to sort of edge computing and putting that into your security cameras. So yeah, we're sort of working on being that one-stop shop.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
As an accountant by trade, I am a little bit geeked out by governance. But yeah, I think governance is important, especially in this digital world. You know, it really needs to evolve with the digitization, and it can't afford to be kept behind.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose the first topic, and really I suppose to start understanding this, is, well, what exactly is, when we talk about RPA or AI, like what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah. So I like to sort of explain things in accountant terms, but RPA is robotic process automation, and that is it's software and it's code, and all it does is sort of mimic keystroke, out of a transactional process. So it's like an Excel macro on steroids. So it's low code, and you click through your keystrokes, you record it, and then you play it to run through the process. So that's sort of RPA in a nutshell. And I think it's been well documented now. What it is, there's a lot of providers out there as well in the market. And on top of that is AI, so artificial intelligence, and that really, with RPA doing the keystrokes, the AI is really sort of the thinking and the learning and decision-making part of that process. And AI is very broad. So when people say AI, most of the time they sort of lean towards machine learning, but it can be IoT, it can be NLP, it can be algorithms, it can be blockchain, it could be edge computing. So it is very broad, and it is, in terms of governance, you sort of really need to know what specific automation you are going to be implementing into your company.
Yeah.
So in terms of implementing, so when you first thinking about it and talking about it, you've really got to consider it as a digital worker. So it's going to replace human transactional processes. So that human has a log-on and an employee ID. So you really need to onboard it like an employee. So you need to do all those things, create usernames, passwords, and it will really put you in good stead for governance. So if you set it up like an employee, it will lead you down the path of good governance, and it will prompt you to do all those things like you would a normal employee.
So it's the same as when you set up a normal employee, you've really got that accountability. So you're knowing who's doing what, so then you can track it and
Exactly. Who's managing it, who's looking after it. People like to give them names. So but it has downtime, like it goes on leave. So you really sort of need to humanize your automation, I think, and that builds your trust and its reliance and its capabilities.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then I suppose in terms of what areas you look at this, I mean, for me, in the not-for-profit space, one of the areas that I see as being very viable for a lot of automation is the NDIS, where there's a lot of repetitive paperwork. At the moment, we talk about a lot of different systems that need an integration, but it's really what happens at the moment is that people are just keying stuff into different systems. I mean, that to me sounds like something that could quite easily fall into RPA.
Yeah, 100%, totally right for RPA. So that system to system, transferring data to systems, and even, just digitizing your forms, digitizing your paperwork. So, not-for-profits traditionally have a heavy volume of that paperwork. So just, digitizing those forms, getting the data into your systems, and then, having those legacy systems as well, which not-for-profits tend to have, is, bringing all that data together, helping to centralize it. So RPA is really, really perfect for that. I like, again, with NDIS and not-for-profit, so call centers is a big one for them as well, and we're doing a lot of technology there. We recently did, with a retailer, we implemented some predictive algorithms to forecast sort of call peaks and troughs, so they could better roster their team and better support the callers. And then, in talking about supporting callers, especially with those mental health organizations and call centers, with technology that can go from voice to text, so capture what the person is saying immediately and either escalate that information to other workers or to other callers. That person on the end of the line wasn't employed to see how fast they could type. They were there to support that person, and once you've got that data in your system, you can better harness that and better provide to the needs of the customer and the client. So, maybe it's more training in a specific area of mental health that you need to give to your callers to support the caller on the end of the line. Leveraging the technology to better service your customers.
And I think you were talking to me the other day about in that textualizing the conversation, you could then overlay potentially an AI over the top to look for certain phrases or certain key patterns of text, then could flag either an escalation of the call or support. So say the supervisor needs to come over because there's a high risk call. So it can immediately get someone to come over and provide support without the support worker who's on the phone trying to listen, trying to empathize and trying to understand what's going on. Also at the same time trying to flag down the supervisor. Allows them to focus.
100% correct. It gives you that that alert and that flexibility, and allows you to do more things than what you currently able to do to better support the community. Like, I know technology is seen as a cost, but sometimes it's a cost avoidance, or it's community benefit, and there's so many other benefits.
You do more with less.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So then obviously, if you do go down the path of sorry, I forgot to mention, I'm just pause everybody. If you have any questions, I'm just looking at the screen. If you do have any questions, we have the Q&A up. We will answer questions as we go, because I'm sure things will start bubbling up. So feel free, we'll stop like this and answer any questions. But otherwise, we'll keep going. And there's hopefully will be questions at the end, time for questions at the end. So we'll just keep bumbling on. Planning, implementing. So once you start down the path of RPA, I suppose the governance really kicks in at that planning stage. What is your experience in terms of key steps in terms of that implementation and planning stage?
Yeah, it's a good question. But the good news is, in the lead up to the question of this webinar, who looks after the bots? The good news is the humans look after the bots. So there's nothing to be scared of. But so when you are looking after the bots, you are looking for that ownership piece. So who's owning the robotics? Who's owning the automation? Is it IT? Is it the business partner? Is it the operations? Is it finance? You really need to make those decisions up front in order for it to be a successful implementation. And once ownership's been decided, you really, especially with the governance team and the internal audit teams, you need to get them on board and work with them to really highlight the risks and dependencies. There's questions you should be asking, is the environment got capability to take, more software on? Is there enough code management? What's the effort going to be to launch? Is there enough stakeholder buy-in? These are all things that you need to be thinking of in terms of governance, and, it's worth setting up like a risk register. It's like any sort of project, you need to consider what the risks are going to be and how you're going to implement them when they come up.
Like any sort of big change management process.
Exactly.
You want clear communication, you want to know who you're talking to, and you want to identify potential risks before they happen or before you start.
They're to be mitigated.
Yeah.
What's the escalation path? Like, so document, up front when you're doing your POCs and POVs, like document all these things. If you've got those procedures in place for the error handling and when things come up. And the good thing is with RPA and with automation, they're 100% traceable. So as humans, we're not 100% traceable, but robots are. So they can create audits. So, most of the robots that are created these days will have an audit log that you can produce at any time. When it fails, where it's failed and what it's done. And even when it's run successfully, what it's done, who it's emailed, who it's notified. So all that's 100% traceable, and then it's, actionable at that time, and can be fixed if it needs to be fixed. So that's a big benefit with automation. And then what to do if it fails, then have those procedures in place for when it happens. There's a few products that we use. So UiPath is our sole provider for RPA, and they've been in the market for ages, but they have a lot of stuff online now and a lot of products. One of them is called the Automation Hub. And if you run through that, you can see they've got a few little programs. One's called Task Capture, and it just runs you through the process on what is involved in capturing a task. And that will really prompt you sort of governance wise, like what should I be thinking of? What should I be documenting? What should I be, saving to the network? And especially if you haven't sort of gone through it in the past, it really stimulates that thinking to help you set up that governance framework. And UiPath Run, so they have 30-day free trial. So anyone in the community can download it today and just start having a look around. Testing it out.
And I think, especially from a governance point of view, like I often talk about governance being lived, like it needs to be a lived document. So they were talking about setting up a lot of these documents. These things will, if they're used properly, will be things that continue to evolve, which is why you want to have the structure in place that you can continue to grow and build on as you continue to use automation and it continues to be successful for your organization. So you're setting yourself up for success, and then you're allowing yourself to build on the success as well in terms of having that framework so you know what's going on. And I suppose that leads into the next thing. Like if you put one piece of automation in and it works, I mean, are we starting to see, I suppose, the opportunity where automation's built on automation and people are starting to scale the type of implementation?
Definitely. And I mean, in terms of RPA, it's been around for 4 or 5 years now, so people are really starting to scale it successfully. And in terms of governance, if you did your governance and your checks back then then you would be scaling pretty seamlessly around now. And then looking to evolve that technology and step into AI and other emerging technologies, and because you've built that foundation and you know what you've done, it lends itself very well to other technologies. But I think if you haven't embarked on technology before, definitely when you're running through your proof of concept and proof of value, involve your governance team, involve your risk team, so you can make those decisions with them along the ride instead of at the very end. It will give you success in the long run. It'll streamline that scalability. You'll have a lot more less roadblocks, I guess, especially with stakeholder buy-in and the change management. People will be aware of it and it'll run a lot more smoothly. Then obviously your POC and POVs are tough. That's why they're there, and that's what they're used for, is to iron out all these issues. And I encourage people to include that into their automation implementation for sure.
I mean, one of the things, and I think one of the things that prompted wanting to have this webinar in the first place in the discussion with Natasha was, I find it very interesting that as we start to build more and more automation, and you see it with governance, normal organizations, a lot of times it sort of drops off and people don't do it. And then all of a sudden a few people leave and like, how did we do what we used to do? Automation is sort of the same, is that as we continue to evolve it and it grows, the people who know how it was implemented and how it works might move on. You really need to capture that internal learning and sort of knowledge document of an organization so that you continue to monitor it. And that's implicitly what governance is about capturing how do we do things here.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And robots will be part of how things are done here.
Yeah, definitely moving forward. And I think probably with, NFPs and sort of government entities, they've sort of had that person relied on one person or a couple of people with that knowledge base in their head. So it's very important when you go through automation is that you document, your policies and procedures. So for an example, how we do it at Black Book, when we come in for an engagement, we create a document called a PDD, which is a process design document. And we produce that, which is a workflow and a process map of your existing process, which people probably don't have in the first place because they're loath to do process documentation. And then from that, we create the solution design document, which puts in place the tools and mitigates the risks. And so it's about documenting that and, transferring people's knowledge into that document so they know when people leave that they'll be continuously able to do that process and improve on that process. And I think like when people are reluctant to do that, I always encourage them, that's your legacy. You're going to create this document that people are going to live by for years to come. Don't be shy in sharing that information.
Yeah. And that's there's a question that's come through in terms of managing employees' resistance to new technologies and successful techniques in mitigating that reaction. I think this is where governance is actually, we talk a lot about automation getting rid of people's jobs, but governance of automation is a new job that wasn't there before automation. So I think part of that communication process with employees is going, well, this isn't necessarily about eliminating staff, it's about being able to do more. There will be a retraining of staff, but people's knowledge in how things work, and if you get involved in the RPA process, well, this is the way of the future. So as long as you bring employees, I think, on the journey, this is, I suppose, what I'm saying. Your thoughts are like, that helps, but how have you felt with, that's me conceptually. Natasha will now tell you how it works in the real world.
But it does, 100% right. Involve your employees from the get-go, make them feel like they're a part of the process, and they need to be. You can't do it without the SMEs, like the subject matter experts. If you're mapping a process, you need their knowledge, you need their specific knowledge, like their expertise in the process. So you can't do it without them. And it's about repurposing their skills that they're no longer entering a payroll or a timesheet, but they're served talking to an employee when, they need a leave balance, or, it's better servicing the company. I'm sure they weren't there to employ, to type in, these many hours. So it's about utilizing and taking advantage of their skills that they were actually there to pay to do, and then, and reskilling them and developing them. So they'll be learning new skills, which will hold them in good stead for the future, because we're only moving forward. And this is the pathway is technology. To be able to teach a person that didn't grow up with that or learn that, it's vital for them to know that. So by passing that knowledge on to them and training them up I think is an admirable thing to do, and to keep them on board. And a lot of the time they make the SMEs like the AI, the RPA champion. So they, like the troubleshooters or the error handling, because they know instantly, the human judgment and where to assess it and the outcome what the robot should be doing.
I think just as a side note, it's interesting. I think so when automation's happened in industries before and historically. So for example, the automatic teller machine, when that came into the banking industry, everyone think, oh, everyone's going to lose their jobs, it's all over. Employment grew in that. So that automation actually allowed banks to become, you can argue this either way, more customer focused, but it allowed a lot more service delivery to happen. So I think that's what you see in automation, is that when you get rid of what are repetitive jobs, which are quite hard for us as humans to do, it allows us to spend more time on the human side of our jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. And you touched on creating new jobs, and 100% it's creating new job. We've got brand new degrees though, we've got, brand new, I saw a role advertised as an AI ethicist, the other day. So it's creating a lot more jobs than it is foregoing. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. I suppose in terms of the governance side of things as well, it sounds like there's a lot, but really, if you get someone who's working with you who's good at the governance side of things, really, it's what they're focusing on is communication and capturing information. And that should be relatively light. Like, it shouldn't feel like it's holding you back. It should be something that's supporting you. That's what governance is. It's really there. It should be very light touch. It's only really, and it becomes really important when something goes wrong. And I think we see that already with governance. So, for example, organizations that have poor governance tend to be the ones that don't do very well, or when something goes wrong, it goes really, really wrong. With automation, I think we'll start seeing that in the next, who knows, few years now, where they've put automation in place. The governance of it has sort of lapsed, and everything's just running. And then there's a software change or a process change. No one really manages it very well, and it actually causes damage to the organization. So there's also governance, thinking of governance as a bit of an insurance policy as well for the organization. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, 100%. And you can't, if you're new to governments, or if you're new to technology and being a governance guru in the past, there's people, there's a lot of information out on the web, and there's, people like us you can talk to who do it day in, day out.
Yeah.
But you can, that you can use automation to govern better as well. So I think out of technology, compliance has been a bit of a fallout when implementing it. But now I think it's sometimes a driver. So people want to use it for compliance, like for that monitoring tool that no one can keep an eye on because there's just streams and streams of data and it's humanly impossible to do. So there's also an advantage of using automation for better governance. You'll pick up things that, you might not have known as there, fraud, picks up so much more fraud now.
Yep.
So it's definitely governance sort of needs to evolve with it, as well as almost consider it themselves to keep up with the digitization. And another thing with the putting in a robot for compliance, there's technology that's, you can get a attended bot versus an unattended bot. So an attended bot is more like a chat bot, and you're more engaged with it, and there's a lot of human in loop process and human judgment, whereas an unattended bot sort of sits on the server and just does its thing and doesn't need much interruption. But so for those companies that are really risk adverse and want to sort of try it, you can always look at an attended bot.
Are you sure you want to delete?
Exactly. It just prompts you in case that the trust issue there with sometimes.
I think that's probably the main sort of points that we wanted to cover off. I think so. If there's any questions, definitely feel free to shoot them through. I think with the governance of automation, it's a bigger topic, but I think as we work through and get more humanizing the bots and understanding sort of how they fit into your workforce, and that they're not going to destroy the human element of your work, it's actually going to enhance it, I think is very an important concept to be thinking about. How can you make sure you're automating the right tasks? That's a good question. What are the right tasks to automate?
Okay, so I mentioned the UiPath Automation Hub. So they have a little tool on there, and you can put in your process, and it will ask you questions like, is the data structured? What's the volume of the data? How long it takes? So by answering those questions, it can give you a bit of a judgment on if it's a correct process to automate. So you can do that quickly and freely sort of online. But, you would be looking at processes that are traditionally high volume. So, with a lot of paperwork, like you're starting with RPA, that's the sort of stuff you need to look at.
So like membership applications.
Customer account creation, debtors, creditors, even email inboxes. If you're getting like 100 emails a day from a customer inflow, you could put some AI on top of that, some natural language processing, because AI can read, and it can escalate those emails to where they need to go. It can delegate them to people where it will get escalated and attended to. In terms of AI, you really need to have a problem. So what's your biggest business problem? Is it that I can't capture I don't understand my customer. So do you need some, are you looking at social media and look at scraping internet information? Is it seasonality? Like, is it those external factors that contributing to your problem that you can utilize with AI, with an algorithm or with machine learning? So yeah, with AI, you really need to have understand what your problem is, and then you can narrow down which task or which process to automate.
Yeah, that's cool. Another question we've got here is, are there any major signs that you need to overhaul or improve your existing governance model? This is one I like a lot. I mean, if governance feels like it's compliance, then you need to overhaul it, because if you're doing things because you have to, that's compliance. Governance is doing things because they improve your organization. So compliance always feels heavy, because I have to do this. Governance should feel light. If it doesn't feel like it's easy, if it feels like it's a mystery, well, then it's not working. If you've got policies you haven't looked at or you don't know where they are, it's not working, because any of the documents that we talk about today, it should be something that's readily referred to. When people go, well, I'm not sure if that's my job or someone else's job. Well, that's governance. That's accountability, responsibilities, knowing who's doing what. All these things, governance, it permeates through all these things within the organization. So normally one of those things would trigger and say, well, if we don't know who's doing something or who's looking after it, the next question you ask, if you can't get to an answer, it really is that time to have a look at the governance. And just sometimes it can be simple as kicking the tires and away you go. It doesn't need to be a lot of work to get things moving, but it's just doing things on purpose.
Yeah. And yeah, I 100% agree. And I guess from a technology perspective, if you're moving from a manual platform to a total digital platform, like if you're changing the way your business operates, it's 100% chance, you're going to have to revisit those existing policies. If customers are ringing in and they usually fill out a form, but now they're filling out a new form, that captures data, and, there's the privacy things as well. So if you're working in a new way, it's definitely time to revisit the governance and compliance. Yeah.
And I think with especially where you're going from like what you're saying, a manual to a digital process, and it's the first time you've put in sort of governance over automation, I would recommend you get someone who's got experience in doing that, because you're building something from scratch as well.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you get the foundations right, and they'll make things easier as you go.
Yeah. And I think customers have that expectation that what you're doing, like that you've thought about that governance and you've thought about those internal processes. And, especially if you're attached to regulation, that you've done all that. So it is necessary. Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions that are out there? Because otherwise we're probably going to look to wrap this up shortly. Nothing's coming through.
That's spot on time.
Spot on time. How about that?
So efficient.
So efficient. There were no robots injured in the filming of this video.
Well, I'm going to use that.
No, thanks, Natasha, for coming in. It's been really cool to touch on automation and what it can do, and also then the governance side of it as well, and who's looking after the bots and who's looking after those employees that you bring on that are actually robots. So that's pretty cool. Thanks for your time.
No, pleasure. Thank you, Justin.
Actually, if I've been slacking the slides, but if anyone has any questions or would like some additional information, there's both of our details up there. So Justin Hogg at rightsource.com.au or office at Blackbook AI. Chuck us an email. Happy to answer. Happy to help. It's a great journey. It's a start of a lot of things that are going to change
exciting time.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Exciting times. So front of the curve. So again, thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate your time. Thanks again, Tasha.
It's okay.
Until next time, I'll catch everybody later. See you.
Bye, guys.